So this is about free money. We're going to ask the question, are government's incentives actually working? We have an esteemed panel that I'm going to try to wrangle here. Let me introduce them so we can get started. Let's see. On my left, is that right? Yeah. So Evan Fitzmaurice is director of the Texas Film Commission, which supports Texas's growing and diverse media industries, which includes video games, and wants to help increase Texas's competitive advantage, I guess, position worldwide as a production destination. Before joining the commission, Evan practiced law in LA at the entertainment law firm of JTWA and Klein PC. While representing the firm's writer, director, actor, and producer clients, he focused on film, television, and digital production company financings and related transactions. His long bio is actually in your booklet there, so I'm not going to read all of it, except to say that he came from LA to Dallas after having worked at K&L Gates LLP in LA and Dallas, and then also at Locke, Lord, Bissell, and Lydell. He's a member of the state bars of both Texas and California, past member of Beverly Hills and Dallas Bar Associations. Okay, he is a native of Dallas. That's cool, I didn't know that. And, oh God, you went to UT. Okay, that's fine. School of Law, where he's got a law degree as well as and a bachelor's degree from UT. So he's a double hook'em horn. Yay. Okay, welcome, Evan. Jeff Pellegrin. Started off in the industry at the age of 10. Really?
It's kind of a joke, but yeah.
Okay, I'll go with that. He was actually included in Nintendo's Power magazine, which was issued in August 1990. You were 10 in 1990. How could you get on a panel? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Since then, his passion and deep desire for making games led him to become a developer, producer, business development manager, and finally economic developer. So he's done MMOGs, released schedule across department teams, mid-size studio. His expertise in his business development, including coordinating and conducting development dealings with middleware solutions, payment process outsourcing firms, etc. He worked closely with Louisiana's economic organizations, including Louisiana Economic Development, Baton Rouge Area Digital Industries Consortium, and Baton Rouge Area Chambers. And currently, Jeff is executive director of the Louisiana, what is the LDGI?
We couldn't call it just LGI because it was, people got confused with gaming with gambling, so we had to put digital in front of it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so D is for digital. So he was born and raised in Houma, Louisiana. He's got a graduate degree from LSU and an MBA from University of New Orleans. Did you actually go to class?
Sometimes.
Okay. And he's a Scrum Management Master, certified and a black belt in Scrum. I'm just kidding. Sean Thordson is a repeat panelist, is an attorney in Orange County, California, where he began his legal career in 2007. He's licensed in California and Nevada state and federal courts. He focuses largely on copyright trademark law, where he assists smaller developers and filmmakers with their copyright and licensing issues. His larger interest and focus is on the video game industry itself. He regularly attends conference seminars concerning legal matters affecting our industry, and obviously keeps current on everything that affects us. His passion for the copyright trademark law as it relates to the video industry is such that he keeps up with both case law and news articles related to that. And we're delighted to have all of you here. So again, the topic of this panel is going to be around doing business and how does we're the government and we're here to help you. How does the government actually help us, and what are the incentives? And what I'd like to do is do this panel a bit differently than the others. Just because it's middle afternoon and you're special because you're here and the others are napping. What I'd like to do is do half the panel, have Q&A, do the other half of the panel, and do more Q&A. This way, to involve you as quickly as possible. And I have a laser pointer, and if you fall asleep, I will point it at you. Okay. Let me start out by just kind of juicing up the conversation maybe a bit. So a few years ago, people started saying the world is flat. I guess you all heard that. It doesn't matter what it's done. Everything's going to be outsourced. Somebody's going to do it somewhere. It's going to be cheaper, better, etc. I never really believed in that. I personally preferred Florida's notion of spikiness. I believe, just like he did, that the world is spiky, meaning that very creative people want to be around other creative people. So then it turns out that it behooves us as people, as governments, as counties, as universities, to have an ecosystem, a place that fosters a spikiness, that actually brings people who are like Feather, who are interested in video games, let's say, or movies or things like that, to be in an ecosystem, in an environment where they are in close proximity with each other. I don't think I have to tell you this, because we know that, right? I mean, if you want to say, I want to start up in silicon, something to do with silicon, where are you going to go? Silicon Valley, right? So there is something to be said. If I want to go into the movie business, I want to be an actor, an actress, things of that nature, well, it behooves me to be maybe somewhere around, let me think, LA, Hollywood. So there are these places, and they didn't come about just because of happenstance. They came about because we human beings like to be around other people that are doing things that are similar to us. So we want to go to where we are actually thought highly of, rewarded, and we can be around other people who are doing the same thing. So because of that, I always believed that if universities and government and industry could come together and actually create these environments, great things can happen. As a matter of fact, Silicon Valley did not grow on a tree. It is there because of the leadership of a particular dean, happened to be a dean of engineering at Stanford, who saw that could be an amazing enterprise and went after it. And of course, it was supported by Stanford, and it was supported by the industry, and it feeds on itself today. So what we need is great institutions of higher learning who are preparing individuals who want to stay in that area. We need amazing industries and business who understand that climate and want to foster it. And we need the support of the government. Now, the government really is not there to legislate its happening, but there to support it. That's kind of a perspective. You could agree or disagree with it, but I throw it out there as a model that has worked before. It worked in Boston. It worked in Silicon Valley. And I think, to a large extent, it's being used in Louisiana. We obviously would love to see it in Texas, and we have a governor who actually believed in that and wanted to see it happen. And so, first and foremost, maybe I'll throw it out there to the three of you if you want to comment on this. Do concentrations actually still work, or is Route 121 in Silicon Valley, are they just like oddities that'll never happen again? Evan, you want to take that on first?
Yeah, I think it's pretty crucial. It's a cultural thing, and the culture is the result of, I think, what you're presenting as the spikiness, the result of having the institutions like the Guildhall, which we couldn't be prouder of in Texas, in our community, and couldn't be more a jewel in our crown than it is. And then the industry that supports it, all those things, and government support, or government staying out of the way the best way possible, but incentivizing where appropriate. That ends up creating a culture, which you see particularly in Dallas and Austin and Texas, where like-minded people come together, not only because they're employers there, but because there's a cultural touchstone that is familiar to them, that's a community they want to be in, they want to create in, they want to get educated in, they want to raise families in, they want to be employed in, they want to go drink a beer in, watch a movie in, spend their private time. And I think Texas has great examples of that in Austin and Dallas, and it's the result of decades in cases of the development of institutions. So couldn't agree more. Spikiness is a great word for it, and I think it is very important. I would just say that the incentive piece is something that, oddly enough, came about well after, at least in Texas, all those things were in place. And it was a recognition by our office that we needed to not only continue to keep the folks and the assets in the state that we have, which is you folks and the companies that are here and those that want to join them, but find a way as we incentivize other industries to bring those that might be fleeing tax disadvantageous environments, or that might want to go where capital is, or might want to go as a workforce, thanks to Dr. Raad, and incentivize them. So those are kind of the various legs of the stool. I think it's working pretty well. We're fortunate in Texas to have these assets in place, and we can continue to incentivize them, protect them, foster them, harness those things, and keep it going in the future.
Thank you. Jeff, what's the position from Louisiana's perspective?
Well, I think you just gave my sales pitch for
I'm sorry.
LDGI. When we talk to people like Ted and other CEOs from other studios, they really love the incentives, but it only gets you halfway there. The fact is that they really say, well, what's the talent like? Because that's what I really care about. And really, for our focus is that, we're building state programs just like Guildhall, where there's graduate programs, also on the community college level. But at the same time, we want to go younger than that. LDGI is doing I don't know if it's the first one, but we're also doing a 3D art scholarship contest where we're having high schoolers get into Max and Maya and Blender, starting to produce some talent. So we really want to hit them at the early stages. And we also been, wish Richard was still here, we have EA North America in Baton Rouge, and some of their developers go around the high schools talking about programming and art and really get them hyped about these careers. So I think it's the whole package, access to capital, entrepreneurism, really get the indie game developers going. Global game jams this weekend. I don't think anyone ever stated that, but if you're a law student, I suggest you go to the global game jams here in Texas and check them out and really help out and get part of the design process, so you get really familiar of the creation process. And so really, Louisiana, we've been doing a lot of great things. In the entertainment side, a lot of people don't know this, but 1 out of 4 movies or TV shows recently have been produced or edited or mastered in Louisiana. So we really want to get in the gaming space, but at the same time, it's really solving the problems, like I said, talent and access to capital.
Okay. So Sean, you've, as I understand it, some of your work and study has been on the international arena and in economic development. Are there some good stories out there you could share with us? Some good news?
It depends depending on the country. I mean, technically speaking, I'm just going to start from the bad end and I'm like the other end look at, because I agree with the analogy of the spikiness, as you said, because people tend to go where this like talent and mind tend to go together, and then the government incentives help on top of it. To put a negative example, you have the United Kingdom, who doesn't actually have any sort of incentives. And the amount of video game development there, although often subsidized, results in a very large number of companies that have gone out of business there. Within recent memory, Bizarre Creations went out of business recently, and many of the talent was forced to relocate off into other countries. Largely, one of the target countries is Canada, who offers tremendous tax incentives and results in, certain districts of Canada competing against each other, because you have the likes of Toronto, you have in Montreal, both of which are known for fabulous tax incentives, and then which I believe is more in the case of Montreal, and Toronto itself, which is known for having a large pool talent to pull from. And so you get everybody sort of congregating together partly because of these incentives. Ireland is also trying to introduce incentives, and I believe, TIGA is also trying to get Scotland to introduce a tax incentive, including a £100,000 incentive for startup companies in Ireland to incentivize video game development. So I certainly agree. It's just a matter of, on the international scale, where is it really incentivized to go in order to get the talent to come there? Because otherwise you end up in a situation like the United Kingdom and talent starts flowing out of it, which is certainly going to stifle the industry there. I believe I was reading in the research, I think it's about 4 out of 5 game developers in England have largely worked on projects that ended up being canceled. And admittedly, of course, there's tons of projects that end up getting canceled down the line, but that's still a staggering number for them. And like I said, with companies like Bizarre Creations going out of business and the talent leaving, there isn't much incentive to actually develop within that country.
Okay. Well, let's get down into the down and dirty into the numbers. let's talk first about Texas. What does the state do specifically? I mean, what can you say about that?
Sure. We were one of the earliest states to not only have a film commission, but then as things evolved into multimedia, to have a video game component of our incentive program. Those of you who aren't as familiar with the incentive evolution over the last 15 years or so, which was initiated in Canada and then moved its way into the U.S. as a means to bring film and television production out of California into other communities around the country. That's been basically part of kind of the jigsaw puzzle of the landscape for 10 years or so. Texas started its program in 2005. It was unfunded, but we had a statute which from the very beginning included in that film and television and commercial incentivization statute video game design. And then when we were funded in 2007 for the first time with $20 million, we had a 5% program, and we would pay developers and publishers who made games in Texas 5% of what they spent in the state back to them in a cash grant. No tax rebate, no redemption issues, just a check at the end of it once you turned in your expenditures. So we were very early. A lot of states came after really in succeeding years. In 2009, we got $60 million. And then when I took the gig a little over a year ago, with my rule changes that happened this summer in August, I jacked that 5% up from video games up to meet parity with film and TV, which was a recognition by me that video game economic development was crucial in Texas in order to continue to keep what we have here and incentivize more, to send a signal to the industry that they were as important to us as film and TV are, particularly in light of the standalone benefits of video game economic impact with the salary impacts, the things that happen positively from a job standpoint that's pretty unique to the video game world, or at least more aligned with what's going on in chips and software and other high tech. So those rule changes came out, and it was very well received. And we had, as recently, I guess, as July, a nice announcement from EA that they were bringing a bunch of jobs from California. And the president of EA stood up with the governor of Texas and, pointed out to our program specifically as a significant reason why they were coming from California to Texas, particularly the parity that was given in the percentages. So the gamers have responded, the companies have responded. We've always had good participation in the program since 2007. They're particularly interested since we increased the percentages in August. And what it means now is if you have a game that's going to cost over $5 million, depending on where your headquarters are, where the creation is occurring, you could get as high as 17.5% back from the state of Texas as a check to your company for doing nothing other than that which you were going to do anyway with a profit motive. So that's the evolution of the Texas program. It could eventually get higher. We are happy to have funds, happy to have received appropriations from the legislature this last session in a difficult economic climate in Texas. But there's great unanimity, great bipartisan unanimity, and the governor is a huge fan of video games. He's a huge fan of the parity and percentages and was eager to head out to North Austin in July and meet with the EA executives to make that announcement. So those are good jobs for Texans. They pay a lot of money. It makes the state the magnet that it's been now for decades for job creation and companies that are in less tax advantageous states to consider moving to Texas, because not only is the economic climate attractive, but as has been pointed out, the executives of these companies are going to go here because they know we have decades now of a rich, deep video game crew base of people who've got a lot of titles under their belt and know how to create value.
So, Jeff, does Louisiana want to check that or raise it, or where are we? 17.5%, or yeah. So tell us a bit. So tell us a bit about what Louisiana is doing, and maybe tie into that some of the success stories. I know you talked about EA, but maybe a bit more of the numbers.
Okay. So talk about the monetary and then the non-monetary benefits. So the incentive program, is 35% of all your labor expense is counted as a tax credit, and then also 25% of your production costs. So any other overhead that's incurred in the state, it's also a tax credit, and that's what Canada does not offer. Now, the one thing that we did change last year was that you can take that benefit and turn it into a rebate and sell it back to the state, and you'll get your check in 2 weeks at 85% of the value of that incentive. Now, talking about other non-monetary incentives. We just built EA a $30 million building next to LSU campus. Other victories we have, we just landed, Gameloft is moving their headquarters from New York to New Orleans, and they're going to be hiring anywhere between 200 and 400 employees. We also have another program called Fast Start. I don't know how many people heard of this, but we kind of stole it from Georgia. It's the fact that if someone comes in and says, you know, I'm having a hard time finding Ruby on Rails or HTML5 programmers, well, Fast Start is they go find them either through Mary Margaret or any other kind of recruiters, and they find these developers. They help relocate them, they train them, and they also do the screening process. It really takes all the HR headaches that a lot of companies like, well, we don't know if we're gonna find them. Well, we'll go find them for you, we'll bring them, and we'll take care of that problem. And that was a big selling point from Gameloft. Another incentive that everyone keeps talking about, these tax credits, that, you know, Louisiana right now, R&D incentives are the highest in the whole U.S. with 40% tax credit on that. It's much like the 30%, which is national, but ours is 10% more, and it's more of a rebate, and you don't have to go through 50 pages of paperwork. I think the application is like 2 pages. And so competitive-wise, you know, we stay there with Texas. We compete. I think our top competition is Canada. I think we're talking about international, a lot of companies going to Malta because they're giving out free dollars, but supposedly they can't get anyone to pay the relocation costs to travel over there and land there. So I think the fact that Louisiana is a high quality life, low cost of living, we pay good salaries for our employees. So there's a real big draw and attraction there.
Sean, I know that I may be asking you a very hard question, but I'm asking you to quantify, if you can, are there any data out there to quantify the effect that these incentives have had on the U.S. market in terms of game development, one way or the other?
You mean in quantitative numbers? You know, how much in jobs, or how much?
Yes, because of the incentives, we have so much more we would not have had otherwise. I guess I'm asking the blunt question: are incentives working?
It's hard to say. I guess it depends on whose perspective. In terms of talking about, you know, large-scale developers, something like, you know, your EAs, your Activisions, I'd say they're doing the trick. The problem is it's kind of hard to evaluate with how some of these incentive programs are actually structured. For example, the one Rhode Island setup provided, I think, I have the numbers here for all 20 states, if you just give me one.
Oh, great. Numbers, okay.
Yeah, Rhode Island
Take notes for questions later. And Jean-Martin, I'm gonna come to you later.
A $75 million you could get in loans to lure companies. You know, Rhode Island set up a $75 million loan program to try and lure companies from competing Massachusetts. And there was a set amount of jobs you had to create within that time. I believe the number was 850. I could be slightly off on that. And I had to create 850 jobs within 4 years. The thing is, in order to make sure, you know, companies came in, they made the program such that you could receive that loan once you set up in Rhode Island within 2 years. But the requisite job creation didn't actually have to be created until 4 years later. Oh, sorry, not 4 years later, until 4 years total. So 2 years after you can get the grant. And it's come under political fire by, you know, the general public and various politicians within Rhode Island, because they're saying, you know, we're giving out all this money, but are we necessarily creating the jobs? What if the jobs are eliminated? But the program was really designed, you know, it was done that way in order to incentivize the companies to actually come. They're saying you're going to get the money, and there's generally a clause in a lot of these that has a penalty that if you don't create said number of jobs, you'll owe certain money back, or necessarily penalties for it. On the whole, I think it works. Most of these programs are fairly new, created within the last few years, and it is in fact drawing companies. And the big concern for a lot of states, and even the United States as a whole, is, as Jeff said, that we're really competing with Canada. Canada is one of the best countries there for tax incentives in order for development and a talent pool. So the United States and every one of the states is just generally competing with Canada to keep developers within this country. And if that means necessarily, you know, giving out the money 2 years early before they create the jobs, then generally that'll probably work out. I think the only risk would be, you know, if too many states realistically start doing it, they start competing with one another, and I think individual states will start hurting. For example, the only really major developer in Rhode Island was, in Massachusetts, was 38 Studios. And they just moved to Rhode Island because their tax incentives were better. Whether or not that's really going to create any sort of financial backlash for Rhode Island, I can't necessarily say. I don't have those numbers.
Yeah, I was about to say that the only deal I know that was in Rhode Island was the 38 studio deal, which I think they took the whole 70 million of that.
So the net gain is zero. Basically, we had one company move from one side to the other. So in terms of the U.S. as a whole, the net gain in that case was essentially nothing.
As far as 38 studios is concerned, I would say the U.S.'s net gain is zero. I mean, Rhode Island certainly benefits as opposed to Massachusetts.
Right. But if we're competing against Canada, if the U.S. is competing against Canada, then in that case, the net was zero, right?
Right.
Okay.
I think it is a matter of, keeping the talent and the developers within the country, because you have, the two most major states right now, of course, are California and Texas.
Right.
I think we're talking about two different things, one being relocation, the other one being expansion. We have a game studio called Firebrand Games that owns 3 different studios, one in Gasclow, Scotland, the other one in Florida, and now recently in Baton Rouge, and they hired about 30 employees and doing racing games. So
I am interested now specifically in the notion of expansion. So what is the net gain, if you will? Do you have any data?
Yeah,
on
I mean,
that you can share
I
with
was
us,
going to make an
Herman?
apples-to-apples comment to that as well, that, there's incentive program, which is basically percentage programs based on economic spend, which is quantifiable. Then there's economic enhancement programs. For instance, Texas has the Enterprise Fund, which is more of a corporate relocation program, which has been, richly funded in the past and is based on economic milestones for typically moving headquarters. Facebook, eBay has received these funds, a lot of older economy companies, and that program has been in existence for years and years. It's a separate program, has nothing to do with the Film Commission or the video game world, but it's the primary means by which Texas brings headquarters and jobs from other states into the state, with economic milestones that are tied onto the deal that the company has to reach to either get successive tranches of money or to avoid having to pay back the initial payments that were made. So that's a big tool in the Texas kind of enhancement or coaxing toolbox. There's also the fact, which is not really an incentive per se, but it certainly is one, as we all know, and that's Texas has no state income tax. And sales tax is exempt in many areas of production and manufacturing. One other thing I would mention that we've had for years and years and years is a dedicated 100% full-time employee of my office, the video game coordinator and liaison, who happens to be here, Leah Smith, if you don't mind standing up, Leah. Leah works at the Film Commission. She came out of the video game world and has been in our office for many, many years, and is someone who we rely on a day-to-day basis to liaise with the community, keep us apprised, and she travels quite a bit, goes to all the conferences. So just wanted to point her out since you're all here.
Same question.
Well, talking about expansion, I like to maybe even start that from the very beginning. And I'm really, not going to start comparing everything between the Texas, but what we're looking to do is also help startups and really the whole indie game development. So our incentives have no minimum and no maximum as well. So we still got the 5-person PSN gamers, developers making games, as much as we got, Gameloft and EA. So there is no min, there's no max for Louisiana. Another thing I wanted to talk about was that our sunset, and I know we got a bunch of different attorneys in the room, but I don't know if everyone remembers what happened in Michigan. They had these incentives, and then about a year after, they couldn't bank them, and they just pulled the rug, and there was a lot of studios going, where do I go? What's going to happen? We had these incentives, we had these promises. Well, our sunset rules are way out there. I think about 5 years or even more. So we're allowing developers know they have that guarantee that these incentives are not going anywhere. They can put their business here. They can build a next hit title if they want to. So that's why we do see a lot of expansion, and we just in place an angel tax credit that gives investors who do angel investments in Louisiana. They don't have to be a Louisiana investor, but as long as they invest in teams, they'll get 35% of their money back, and that's huge, especially if you're coming out of Global Game Jam with a good idea. So.
Actually, I'd like to expand on something because you said, Louisiana's focusing on startups and indie, which is something I wanted to touch on because I think that's actually one of the limitations of these tax breaks right now for a lot of states. A lot of them are, just offering the tax break itself based on production the employee value, but for as we were discussing earlier, the garage developer, those tax incentives on their own aren't really enough because if you're talking I have a few clients in Ohio who they're developers that are trying to start out, and there may be 3-4 people large, and a 25% tax break really doesn't help them all that much. You need different sort of incentives to bolster an independent development, and there's a few states that try and push that by providing actual benefits in funding. Teague has been trying to push the same as I was mentioning earlier in England to try and get more developers there by actually providing them a cash incentive. And I think that's something that I think more states need to look into, because the number of companies closing down versus the number of companies opening up is staggeringly bad. I believe between 2008 and 2011, there were 219 video game companies that started up. In that same amount of time, 197 closed down. Now, it's not saying that isn't saying it's all crossover. It's not 197 of them closed down. And admittedly, it's still a positive number, but it's still a very high failure rate for a garage developer who, is attempting to actually make a name for himself. I'm putting aside, the success stories like Notch and Rovio, who start very small and then manage to hit one huge success and then puts them on everybody's radar.
So that was going to be my next question: is it enough? Is what the states are doing enough? But then, now that you've said that, Sean, I want to qualify that question in saying, not only is it enough quantitatively, but is it in the right kind of help in order to foster, more of these companies? So why don't you take that first, Jeff?
Yeah. So I kind of want to expand on the comment you just said, Sean. It was so let's talk about non-monetary benefits. And since we were name dropping earlier, we have Louisiana Technology Park here, and it has become a hub for small developers to go. And Steven, you want to raise your hand? There you go. Okay. So at their facility, which I have personally put up a small PlayStation Network or title working on, is that they provide services from having a receptionist, having pretty much external CFO, a PR marketing guy who's the guy in the green sweater next to him, and so from there they have helped us from securing the incentives, from attorneys to bookkeeping to CPAs to literally everything we possibly need as a startup, as a small indie garage band, garage developer. And so
let me see if I understand this correctly. This would be like a state-sponsored incubator kind of an environment?
It's actually citywide.
City-sponsored incubator.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's through the city taxes that they run their organization. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping I'm doing a good pitch for you. So
far you're doing great.
Yeah. So what really is great is that I actually read a couple different studies from Jason Della Ruca, who used to run IGDA, talking about in Canada about these technology incubators going around in Montreal and Toronto and a couple different places that have built these hubs. And a good study of this also is in Brazil. I think a lot of people can agree that Brazil is starting to become a competitor with small development as well.
Is it enough? And is it in the right places?
I could always use more. I think that there's a curve at some point within which people respond energetically to the availability of incentive dollars, and to the left of which it's business as usual. And Texas was doing, thankfully, so well in this regard that a lot of the video game community was more curious and amused by these developments than potentially eager to make use of them. That's changed, I think, in the last year. As far as incumbent companies that are here, that are growing, that are throwing off every year or two entrepreneurs who then start their own companies, get their own deals to develop a title. So we're kind of at a point now where if the money's available, the behavior is starting to match it. More money could mean more growth and even more of a hub than thankfully we have in Texas. That's kind of the arguments that we make to the legislature every couple of years when we have to re-up our program, is that this is a job impacting program. It does have an effect. It's not just a giveaway. We can show data, and there have been studies to that effect. So is it enough? We could use more. We could use more for incentive dollars. We could use more for Texas Enterprise Fund type programs that can bring people here. But I think thankfully in Texas, the best thing that we have to offer is a fairly robust and veteran community that has been doing it for a while, that's bringing about more of the same.
When you go ask for more in a climate like this one, it'd be kind of interesting, right? You say we need more money, and as we know, governments don't have the money to give. So I'm just curious, how does that play out? I mean, do you see this economic climate that we're in as sunsetting? Do you use that word? Some of these things, or having a tremendous impact on them, or is it still important enough, and people care enough about this area that they would still want to fund it? What do you see?
Game development never gets old, and neither does software development. We call this the blue ocean strategy because it's forward thinking. You know, Louisiana wants to move away from being that petroleum and agriculture state. You know, I think we all can agree to what happened with the BP spill, that, you know, we definitely want to go into new markets. So, you know.
Maybe you should go into a cruise liner.
Well, that might flip over, who knows? Too soon.
Yeah.
Well, I think you know, our governor and also our Secretary of Economic Development has said, you know, this is our 10-year goal to build 20,000 jobs in game development, specifically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
Our governor's a huge fan as well. Couldn't be a bigger one. And I think a lot of this has to do with, you know, who's involved in the policymaking side. Our state has pretty good bipartisan unanimity on this topic. Our legislature is very eager to learn more about economic development programs and those that work. Yes, we've got challenges in the state in terms of, economic revenue issues and tax revenue issues, and solving margin tax or, you know, education or whatever particular challenges you might have. But the impact of a program, for instance, which was funded with $60 million in the last 2 years, when you have a state budget, in the $70 or $80 billion level, you know, every dollar is important. It is a zero-sum game. We are very eager to protect and shepherd carefully those dollars that the legislature has seen fit to bestow upon the program. But we'd like to think that, given the size of that relative to the budget, that the story kind of speaks for itself. And thankfully, we've got a lot of bipartisan understanding behind that. So I'm encouraged, but cautiously optimistic, and always eager to tell the story when it comes to policymakers, to let them know that, you know, this is an important program. This is an important industry to Texas. It's something that we're very proud about. We're number 2 in the country. We're very much a focal point. We have a lot of outposts of the largest, companies in this space, and we have an unbelievably robust and active entrepreneurial level of startup companies that come out of not only operations in institutions like the Guildhall, but come out of the larger companies themselves. So it's just a very self-nurturing, self-sustaining, successful industry that creates the kind of jobs that Texans, want to have, want to keep here, want to bring more of.
Well, you know, Peter, the thing that I was going to say, not to compare apples to apples, but really Georgia in the last 10 years, they had these incentives. They've shown that it works. The incentives hasn't moved. They have built community support, not only with IGDA, but Big E and Wiggy and those associations, access to capital and entrepreneur programs. And they really have become a competitor as well, against Canada as well. You got great projects and good studios like CCP that's in Atlanta. And then you have High Res Studio with Global Agenda that just came out.
So I'm going to ask Sean a variation on this question, but in the meantime, if I could get you maybe to get the microphones, I'd like you to give one. Jean-Martin, could you raise your hand over there? Please give one there. And could you bring it over to the front over here to Mr. Ryan right there? And I'm setting you up, guys. Sorry, but just I'm going to pick on you here just a second. Mike, don't sleep on me. I'm going to come back to you just 1 second here. So here's the question for you, Sean, while they're getting set up. Can the governments, do you know of a way that, because you scared the heck out of me. I mean, I'm looking at these numbers. I'm looking at 219 getting started, 197 closing down. That's pretty drastic. Can the governments is it possible to make an analysis, to perform an analysis that looks at the ROI? Like, we've invested so much money, And as a result of that, our tax base has increased by that much. We have so many more quality and quantity of this spiky ecosystem that's going on.
You know, I think they could. The problem is that, you know, they have to try and figure out how far down the line they want to see the ROI actually benefit. Because, you know, companies like EA, if they see a good tax benefit in a state, they'll open up a branch there and suddenly infuse, you know, somewhere between 300 to 700 jobs sometimes, in which case, you know, the benefit is almost immediate. On the other hand, you know, as I was saying earlier with the independent developer in a startup, which sometimes creates some flack with the video game investments because a lot of naysayers, and there was an article in the New Jersey, I don't remember which newspaper was from New Jersey that was about this, they were saying, you know, it doesn't create the jobs. This tax incentives are meant for startup companies. And if you're doing that with an independent developer, if you're trying to incentivize them, your return of investment is going to be a long way coming. And on top of it, it's probably not going to be that high, you know, unless you happen to fund someone, you know, who has someone like Notch or Rovio's vision, then suddenly it's going to be a lot higher. I'd say it's worth it. The problem is that the programs need to be specifically tailored in order to do it. Example, you know, a startup company needs money more than it needs the tax break. But, I mean, of course, someone like EA, Activision, Square Enix, they're not going to turn down, you know, free money if it says, you know, we're giving $100,000 to video game development. So you have to make sure that money is going to where you need each program.
I see.
I think the fact, and I don't know, Stephen, tell me if I got this right. Every dollar we spend in our incentive for digital media, which is gaming, we get $4 back as tax revenue.
For each dollar, you get 4x.
Yeah.
I'd say that's a good ROI. Could you quote?
We had a study as well. There's always a study. Our study looked at around $58 million worth of cash grants going out and looked at economic impact beyond this direct effect. Obviously, if you look at direct, we're not making payments until the spend has occurred. So it's obvious that if we were previously paying 5%, it was 5% on, you know, 100 cents. And obviously those dollars, arguably, depending on the applicant, might not have happened but for the program existing. So then you get into the causation issue. But when you look at the indirect, the induced, the derivative spend, all the various different ways that implant and other kind of, you know, ecometric kind of methodologies look at things, there's something almost approaching $1 billion of economic activity around something like $60 million worth of cash grants. And that also included film and television, video game, commercial. But the impact is pretty clear. Our program has a $100,000 threshold to be eligible to participate. So we're not engendering necessarily someone who's spending, you know, a much smaller amount of money. When the program was passed on a statutory basis, that amount was seen as a threshold above which there was, you know, economic activity sufficient to continue to incentivize. And in the video game world, $100,000 seems to be a pretty decent inflection point. To find that which, you know, we should seek to incentivize and reward with state dollars, below which might be, you know, a smaller level of activity.
So
Just to
please go ahead,
explain, there's one thing I didn't touch on. I've been meaning to, is there's another benefit, and this one is less tangible. And I'm not entirely sure how much, you know, each individual state would be looking into it as a major. But one of the points of a lot of these tax breaks and incentives was to benefit society as a whole, not just necessarily, you know, income generation or job infusion. And one of the reasons the video game industry gets such flack from, I think, the general public is they're considering, you know, you're getting tax breaks for just creating, quote-unquote, frivolous media. I would disagree with that entirely because, you know, on the bare surface level, you could say that you're just producing a product that some teenager is going to pick up and play for a few hours and then put down, and why should we fund money into that? On the other hand, you have R&D we have the R&D research, which gets a lot of flack too, that's saying it shouldn't go to video game development because it's easy to fall under it, that you've increased your R&D, you know, the following year when you were probably going to do that anyway for different reasons. But to take one specific example where I think, you know, that puts my opinion, those fears to rest is with Microsoft's Kinect. I'm not a perpetuant of Kinect myself. I'm not willing to, frankly, move my couch in order to play video games. But about a month or so back, I saw an advertisement on television that Microsoft started doing for the Kinect. And it didn't focus on the video games at all. It showed people using it for, admittedly, these are all, and admits it's all fictional, but they're using it for medicine, they're using it for like bomb diffusion, they're using it, to generate new styles of music. And I thought, this is a brilliant ad. This is it showing just how, development in the video game industry can benefit society as a whole, how the innovation here can be applied elsewhere. And it's what I found fascinating about Connect from the announcement Microsoft said. I'm not as interested in the games. I'm interested to see what people will do with it. And I think the R&D and tax incentives that are constantly provided by states perpetuates this and greatly will help society, even though, it's not necessarily seeing an immediate generation of revenue or jobs. I think on the whole, in terms of and from a humanitarian perspective, it's worthwhile.
Thank you, Sean, for making that point, because that's a point we try to make from the university side, that really it is not about frivolous interaction. It is an engine of creativity for the future, that you could make a parallel that in order to put a person on the moon, obviously we spent a ton of money, but there were a lot of benefits from having done that are just vastly superior to just having put a person on the moon and brought them back. And I think video games do exactly that. Thank you for making that point.
I would say, just to close, I'm sorry on that point,
no.
I never have to encounter that argument.
You don't have to justify.
It's so unanimously understood that these are quality jobs and this is a worthwhile thing to attract, that I haven't had a single conversation with either on the industry side or on the legislative side. They get it. And when you're talking about $80,000 a year jobs, it kind of screams. It kind of speaks for itself.
Where were these people 9 years ago when I was talking about the Guildhall and starting a school? I wish I had met them then.
You created them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's right.
So as I promised you, we were going to enlarge the circle. So the panel now is going to move from this side and go over to the other side. We're like halfway through. So I'm going to pick on a 2-3 people, and all of you please participate, but I've sent the microphones to 2 people. I'm going to ask Jean-Martin first, Jean-Martin Mas, who's at Behavioral, oh gosh, okay, now.
Behavior Interactive.
Thank you, Behavior Interactive in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Tell us, Jean-Martin, are incentives working in Canada?
Definitely. Montreal now is one of the big hubs in video game production, Canada as a whole. The industry has been growing in Toronto. The Ontario government put in place some incentives 2-3 years ago. Which brings me to one point I would like to make, because I'm not here to sell Montreal or Canada as one point I would like to make. It's not U.S. versus Canada. I think we have to look at it as 60 different jurisdictions in North America competing for those jobs, and like the movie business, if there's no incentive, everything will go to California, because that's the black hole of the entertainment world. So, because if there's no force attracting the entertainment business elsewhere, it would all go to California. So, years ago, the Quebec government put in place some tax credit program, and it is one of the reasons it is a success. Is of course the pool of talent was there. Montreal is an attractive city for people from Europe, for Europeans in particular. So it's easy to attract people who lose their jobs in France and the UK. But one of the main reasons is that they were able to attract the anchor tenant, which was Ubisoft. And Ubisoft was a big success in Montreal. They have, I think, 1,800 people now working. And all these studios, independent or now all the major publishers have built infrastructures either in Montreal or in Quebec City. And almost all of them are from the core group of people were former Ubisoft employees. So you need this big person there will, after that, there will be spin-offs, and either other developer or publishers will come and build their studios around these people, or they will be independent developers. So, and if I may,
Please, yes.
yes, I have a few points, because I think I respect the jobs that the two gentlemen are doing for Texas and Louisiana, but I think it's time for governments to think beyond the tax credits, and I took some notes of what are the clouds I see in the future for this kind of programs. Of course, the first one is the limit to the pool of talent, and we've reached that point in Montreal where basically we're just stealing each other's employees. So you have to make sure that the infrastructure is there in terms of universities, in terms of immigration policies, helping you to attract people. The second thing is it's difficult for managers of these programs to adapt quickly enough to the new reality. So, for example, some programs will pay after the end of production. In a live game, when is the end of production? When is the end of Farmville? You know, is it once the game is launched? Is it once the game is finished? So, and also, so there's a question of when are you entitled, when are you paid, etc., etc. The other question, the other difficulty to adapt to the new reality is what employees are covered by this? Because before it was easy, you had production people and you had guys like me who were just, you know, working in legal or business development or marketing, the janitor, the accountants, etc. Now you have positions like community managers, analysts, and my experience, especially in Quebec, but they have I know they have the same problem in Ontario, is that the government has problems dealing with those jobs. Are those if you have an analyst, is he working on the marketing side or on the production side? And that's, for me, that's another topic that governments will have to address. Mm-hmm. And the last one is these schemes are job creations, are for job creation. And I think the danger in that is that you create jobs, and the danger I see in Quebec is that the industry is, we are a branch of foreign companies, and those companies will just move around. So let's say EA goes to Louisiana, builds a studio, hires 300 people, and the next day they find it that Alabama is offering something better, they'll just move. And then you're caught with an infrastructure or obviously a job loss. So I think the governments have to think beyond that and help the development of IP and become not only an industry that creates jobs, but an industry that creates IP that can be spun off to movies, TV series, etc., etc., and then you become an entertainment hub and not just a job creator.
Thank you so much, Jean-Martin. This was outstanding. Thank you. Did you want to respond to any of that or add to it?
Well, I think his three concerns. First off, timing-wise, you asked, you know, you don't want to wait to the end of production. Where our incentive is that if you want to do it monthly, quarterly, annually, the new provision, what I call the JG Wentworth provision, it's my money and I want it now. So you can do that. You know, I'm not the guy with the question marks that are saying, hey, free money. No. Basically, you can turn that incentive to a rebate for that 85% of the value and get sell your incentive back to the state and get that check. All right. Secondly, who counts and who doesn't count? anyone that's working on the title production-wise, so let's just say you have administrative assistant, and she's helping you but helping the producers or doing things with QA, she would count, okay? I would say people maybe in, you know, your finance department probably wouldn't count. Now, thirdly, we don't like losing, in Louisiana, we don't like losing to Alabama. That's for, we take it very serious.
You touched a nerve there, Jean-Martin. Well done. Well done.
That was good.
How about Texas A&M?
Yeah.
Another thing is, my parents came from Canada, you know, not my parents, my, you know, ancestry. So you guys kicked them out and they, you know, they founded Louisiana. So.
Okay, now, is that a question?
No, that was a statement.
Okay.
So to answer the question about relocation, unless you get in the situation where Kurt Schilling sees a great opportunity in Rhode Island and, you know, there's $70 million on the table, maybe then the studios most studios don't want to relocate. They want to expand. They want to look into new opportunities. We don't really see a lot of projects of we're going to relocate people, their homes, their children, you know, they have friends and family. So relocation-wise is not really a big problem because, and that's the reason why we have these incentives, both in Texas and elsewhere, is because once we know they're there, we have them there, and we have those facility and that infrastructure, and creating IP, like you were saying. So really building the industry there. It's the reason why petroleum in Louisiana has never left, because people like our state, they have family and friends there.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Plus oil's there.
timing people and movement. We pay at the end of a project. We want to know, and it's important that our legislators know that we've incentivized behavior and that behavior occurred. And it's really the only way you can defend a program. You know, if you want to get very aggressive about fostering an industry that doesn't exist, then aggressiveness is called for. What we're trying to do is build upon success and continue to incentivize people to contribute to that success on an ongoing basis. So our program is set up, show us what you did, then we will pay you. As far as what counts, like Louisiana, it sounds like we've got a mix. We don't incentivize overhead, we incentivize our project. And we're very project focused. So, you know, if you buy machines, if you do things that have a useful life after the product is shipped or has been released, you know, we don't include that in the base against which we apply our percentage. There's pieces of it that we do. It depends. It sounds like, you know, if it's related to the project, you know, there's ways that our guidelines kind of slice and dice that. And as far as relocation, you know, as far as being a magnet, you know, using EA as an example, you know, we're fortunate enough to have BioWare in Austin. They've had a big month. A very large project has come to fruition, and it looks very exciting and very successful, and we wish them every bit of success with it. You know, they've also been willing, you know, over the summer to bring some jobs from California and expand their footprint for EA Sports, which we're excited about. And they've also just announced 3 weeks ago that they've opened a massive worldwide customer service facility. So, you know, they're applying and responding to not only the availability of project-specific incentives, which we're eager to receive applications for and bring them into the program, they're also responding to a state climate and the culture again. So you get back to that, and that is that they know that in a state that doesn't have a state income tax, that has a low tax burden and a predictable regulatory climate, it's a place they want to set up business. And these companies, you know, the large ones certainly, and the small ones that, you know, is hypothetically setting up, you know, in the garage or branching off of a big one to do a 6 or 7 person operation that they expect to grow, you know, we want them to be long-term corporate citizens of Texas, and happy people here that can create many, many companies over time. So we have kind of a longer view. We don't feel that we're participating as much as we are in some industries in a flight of people to the best incentive. We want to have a competitive incentive and a climate, a business climate that's attractive. And we feel if we have that, we won't have to compete as much as we do with the race of people. Film's a little different. Film is a bit of a different economic magnet, and the pattern is a little bit different. Of course, certainly the principles are the same, but with video games, we feel like we have some success to build on. We want to continue to be a magnet, continue to attract, but there's various ways to do it.
So, speaking of they come, they will stay, we have great business leaders in the video game industry right here amongst us in this room, and I'd like to pick on one of them, maybe a couple of them, we'll see. But Hart Orion is one of those people, a business leader in the video game industry. Obviously, the Ensemble Studios, you know, then a part of Microsoft, now Robot Entertainment. And I wanted to have you, Harder, just kind of tell us from your perspective as a business leader in the video game industry, how do you look at these incentives, and are they working? Do they make sense? And what would you do if differently if you were designing them? And the microphone is only so we're recording it.
So
just speak up, please.
I think you know, since we're a small developer, sort of under 50 people, our interests are always driven by the creative passion for the product, for the industry, and so we didn't get into the business to go harvest tax rebates or incentives of that kind. It's more of a thing that in a hit-driven business, a lot of it depends on how many swings at the plate that you get. So we view the money that we get back from the state as, in aggregate, giving us another chance at another project, another game, another chance at being successful, and that's really important in our business because the attrition rate is very high, and the chances of success with any one product on any one platform are stacked against you just with the odds. We do view the incentives that we get as modifying our behavior, and it's really so. In the case of what Evan's asking for, that's what we do. I think the one area where it isn't one of the concerns is if we're talking about a talent level kind of thing where we need a voice actor, and we don't have that voice actor in locally, then we'll go wherever the right person for the job is. It may be in California, it may be overseas. But for things that where the talent or the quality level isn't as important, air travel, some kinds of local outsourcing that we do, then we're a lot more amenable to consider the incentives that are in play as part of the decision-making process. We realize that, you know, at any one decision it's not a lot of money, but in aggregate over the length of a project, and the state of Texas doesn't pay until the project is complete and ships, that it does add up. So from our perspective, it's a good program. It's one that we eagerly await our first check, and we also feel like it's doing some of the things that the people of the state expect us to do. So.
And that's playing a role in keeping you here?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, we're at the end of the day, an individual company or an individual project or an individual incentive isn't really the goal. The goal is to create an ecosystem that's self-sustaining and growing. And I think we have a good story going on, certainly in Austin and up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, in terms of building that ecosystem. So that's
Thank you.
Just from a marketing standpoint, for those that are considering it, you don't have to have shipped. We will pay you once you see fit to turn in your materials. Oftentimes, due to confidentiality reasons or otherwise, applicants won't turn in until fairly far along, just because they don't, they want to make sure that things are released. But from our point of view, if you're done spending and the project's finished, and there's something on the tail end that we can look at, then we'll pay you then. So just wanted to clarify that.
Could we get the microphone to Mike Panoff right there in the middle, please? Raise your hand, Mike. Mike is from Edge of Reality down in Austin. He's the biz guy. Mike, are the incentives working for you guys? Do you care?
Yeah, I mean they're huge and they're a very big deal, and we've taken advantage of them. It actually allows us to, I think, undercut some of our California competitors when it came to some of the deals we've been doing. I'd like to point out a couple of things. First of all, Evan, thank you very much for increasing the video game portion to get us on parity with the other industries. Also, I want to point out that the Texas Film Commission actually does other things besides incentives that offer a lot of services for developers. I mean, just little things like Leah, for example, having statistics over, who has the, what studios in Texas have how many people, and how many people are employed in these various areas, and that's information no one else is really doing, and so they're doing a lot of stuff over there that's beyond.
Is that for poaching? Is that for poaching?
Only if you know her really well.
Oh, okay.
I'd also like to give a couple constructive things as well. That I know that there's a lot of developers, and we're actually having some hesitation as well because of the fact that in order to provide the documentation for this, it contains a lot of confidential information. I mean, you have to give actual salary paid to every employee at every payroll. And the fact that this could be public knowledge and anyone can request it, and you have to go through some pretty big hurdles to try and block that. You know, we'd love to see some type of protections in there to make that a little bit more opaque to the public, like fully opaque. And
crystal opaque.
And another thing is that I think the way it's currently set up, it's more for a packaged product where you have a ship date, and then you this is what you've spent, and you get your, then it goes through audit and you get your check. But the new model of games as a service, where you have ongoing support to provide downloadable content and in-game purchases, I don't think the model's set up to handle that. If it is, then I may be misinformed.
But before you answer,
Yeah, sure, go
I'm going to bring it back here, and then
Yeah.
we'll get some. Please, what was the second one? You had a couple? Or
said
just
Oh, those are the two. The one is making sure that information is secure.
opaque?
Because there's, you know, a lot of times we're contractually bound to keep that information secure, and it's not even our choice. So,
Okay.
but then the second one was on the games as a product.
Thank you,
Or service.
Mike. And we have another business leader amongst us, so I'm picking on David Eddings. And if you could pass this microphone over to him, Vice President of Business Development at Gearbox.
So good with words.
So again, David, the microphone is only so because of the recording, so please speak up and project.
All right.
From your
so,
perspective, is it working?
it has worked.
Okay.
And it's been well. It's done rather well. But it's funny. I actually we have our executive counsel Wade
Oh, wonderful.
dealing with that more so than me. But the thing that and I'll let Wade. I'll hand it over to Wade in a moment and let him speak to this. But you know, what Mike was saying is absolutely true. The other thing is about IP protection too, and just not letting people know what we're doing right now. You know, just recently, we've come out with a game a couple of years ago, and id happened to be working on a game that was very similar, and it was just happenstance that we had a similar thought process there. But if that had been I guess open to the public, then all of a sudden there might have been some accusations flying around like, hey, how did this happen or whatever. And that's scary to somebody, a developer like us who owns the IP that we're working on. And to let everybody know that, hey, we have this idea and we want to go ahead and put that out there, that's really exposing us quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we get it. I mean, we understand. I mean, Texas has a commitment to the people of Texas, and as people of Texas, we dig on that. But we're also fiercely independent, and we work really, really hard to protect our IP, our trade secrets, and our employees' information. There needs to be a way to reconcile the steps that a developer needs to take to remain invisible on those issues with the state's own obligation to be transparent on such issues. We just can't, you know, have our skirt lifted to anyone who wants to look at what it is we're doing, how we're doing it.
Are you Scottish? You were
Actually,
you were
of my kilt.
Oh, yeah.
But you get the point. I mean, like, no one's going to want to turn down incentives for good purposes and things like that. That's not the issue on the business level. The business level is we have our own commitments to protect our information, and is it worth it to expose that information for whatever it is you're giving me on a tax benefit? At the end of the day, probably not. And until that problem gets fixed, you know,
So you're turning down the money? Is Gearbox turning down the money?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's very, very interesting. Would you like to say something? Good. There's the microphone, yes.
I'm actually on the board, IGDA board in Dallas, and I don't know how it's going in Austin, because apparently Leah's doing a great job. I love Leah, by the way, of getting all this information, but like the TXMPA has asked me to get all of that same information, as well as the city of Dallas, and I'm like, wait, I know these guys, they don't care what incentives you give them. They're not going to tell you. The bigger companies, which seem to be the ones that are being wooed, don't care. First off, they're not going to give out their private information. Secondly, they don't, it's not enough incentive. And then even on top of all of that, they said that the paperwork for it is enormous and always changing. Is that right? All right. And so they just don't care. And then the small startups and all those people, they do care, but nothing's really happening for them. So what I want to know is how am I supposed to be able to provide this information? I really don't know how you did that, Leah. That's amazing, because I have some of it, but people don't want to give it up. And what can you do to ensure to us in Dallas that all that information won't be made
Okay, now I don't want to turn this panel into a Dallas panel, but I think it's worth asking the panelists. And in the meantime, if I could ask you,
I don't answer these questions.
Yes, yes, you do, but you can do it also
Oh,
offline. I'm sorry. you
Well,
have
I
one more
forgot.
thing
One
to say?
tiny thing left over after that is that the Dallas people said, from what I'm just speaking for them because I'm not even in it, is that there's a general, I feel a sense of lack of confidence in the incentives program because it didn't work with film because we lost out to Louisiana. So why would be working out better for us? And that's not me. Just to let you know.
So you're just saying.
I'm
okay.
just the voice.
So, all right. So while we take on, answering some of these questions really from a high level, maybe 10,000 foot, and leaving the details maybe to a private conversation later, which we'll have ample time for. I don't know you all, so there may be others in this room for whom, whether you're in Canada or you're in Rhode Island or whatever you are, that it could be or could not be working for you, these incentives. And we'd love to hear from you when we open up for questions shortly. But in the interim, in the meantime, addressing some of these issues of, you're giving me incentives, you're giving me money, but you're asking me basically to give you all my information. There's some issues of intellectual property and opaqueness and all that. And then the one I really loved, Jean-Martin, thank you for the idea of not just creating jobs, but also creating intellectual property, which keeps on giving, so to speak, as opposed to jobs that can move on. Sean, do you want to take on any of these things you've heard?
Actually, it rings true with some other concerns I've seen with some other state incentives because some states have been calling for, they want more transparency so they know what their money is going to. I agree, actually. I think it's a terrible idea because for the video game industry, especially for large companies, the IP you own is everything. Anything that could compromise it down the line risks, potential sales, potential benefits. The list goes on. The problem is really how to keep it, opaque, so the information you want doesn't get out. And conversely, to keep the states, satisfied so they get the information they need when they need to be transparent. I'm not certain really at the moment how the two can really be reconciled because it is such a concern. I mean, realistically, your tax breaks, you don't necessarily have to make not everything is always public. EA actually is very candid with some of how much it actually saves in tax breaks. But as far as the state public information, I'd say it's a legitimate concern because nowadays with how tech savvy the average, computer user is, it's not that hard for them to probe to find the information they want to get it out. Sony knows this quite well with how often their information gets leaked before they intend to announce anything.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so a lot about Texas. Evan, I'm going to give you the...
Sure. 30,000 foot. The confidentiality issue is a 50-state issue. It's very much a focus of the ESA, which is the lobbying arm for the industry.
The Entertainment Software Association, for those of you.
I mean, they're all over this stuff. Other organizations are as well. It's not a rule that's in our office. It's a completely separate statute in the state law called the Public Information Act. The Public Information Act has a bunch of exemptions that apply, and there's a spirit with which the Attorney General of Texas applies it and enforces it. And we, as a matter of rule, as a matter of policy, as a matter of what Leah, myself, and others that show up in the office every day choose to do, one way or the other, cannot affect the way that law applies. So what needs to happen, and I'm not advocating, legal changes here. I'd be certainly willing to answer questions and give impressions in my capacity. If there's issues there, the industry needs to focus on that, as I know it is in other states, because every state has some version of this, and it's been a bone of contention for the industry. We totally understand if someone elects not to participate due to these reasons. What we've tried to do is make what we do require as minimal as possible in terms of content. We don't need to have design documents. We don't want them. We want just a rudimentary sense of what the game is about. And when it comes to proving up wages, chiefly video game submissions are made up of wages paid to employees. There's the occasional pizza in there. There's the occasional piece of vendor expenditure, but for the most part, that's it. And what we try to do is, through our guidelines, require as little as possible, but we have to look at something. So we'd like to have broad participation in the program. We'd like to have them feel good about it and use it. Certainly that's the reason it was created. It wasn't created for any other reason. And we like these roadblocks to disappear. To answer Mike's other question about the rules are set up to recognize really any kind of video game. We have a lot of Facebook apps. We have a lot of online games. We have a lot of shipped games. We don't really care what type of game it is. There has to be some endpoint, and we can work with you to decide what constitutes a project. But there's no hard and fast rule about shrink wrap or, anything that's a little kind of older economy. We want to incentivize the activity in the project, and if the project is an online game, if the project is an app, whatever it might be, as long as it's over the $100,000 threshold, and Texans are creating it, that's kind of the end of our inquiry. So, message received on this stuff, it's an issue, the confidentiality issue. It's an issue that's facing the industry, and it's not the Texas Film Commission on one side and industry on the other. It's we understand this law that exists in our statutory firmament. If it's a problem, we'd like to find a way for it to be dealt with. We as a state agency don't have lawmaking authority, but certainly others in Austin do. And if they see fit to do something with this, or they want to ask me questions, I would certainly give them the impressions of the industry about it and see how concerned the industry is about it, because they want to make use of a program. The state wants that program to be popular, but they have to have protections.
Jeff, do you want to take on any of these? 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 foot?
Sure, really high. Everyone participates. No one has ever turned down. I think the only thing that we have shown as public knowledge is how much money at the end of the year have we given out to, I keep saying we as in Louisiana, but LDGI is, our association is for the private industry. So I'm not a government employee, so I can tell you the truth. Everyone participates. I haven't seen anyone ever turn it down. That's the first time I ever heard of that. Yeah, exactly. So, we reflect the interests of the private industry. Our process is really easy. The ply is a page and a half. There's a reason why we kept the rules and everything. We lobby for everything to be really open, because it's also for apps. It's also for technologies with biomed that might be involved with different type of applications that we're discussing with the Connect. So it's just not gaming. It's also for software development. I used to work for a company that is a software solution for streaming for content for games, and they got 2.3 million in credits. So the process was really easy, and I think Texas is the same way, but it's really is, you apply for it, how much you're going to spend on this project. Say it's flour and it's going to cost $2.5 million. You get an external CPA, does the audit, you send in the report, you get your check.
Yeah, we don't require the external CPA unless you're getting over $300,000. We have an online app, it's one page. And when you turn in your stuff, we just need to see that you paid your people.
It sounds to me like there's some conversation after this offline to get someone in. Sean?
I have one thing I want to add. Actually, I meant to say earlier, and you can stop me if I'm getting off on a tangent. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to intellectual property. So one other concern I would say, about the transparency issue is I think there's one concern is, if you have to register the project into the paperwork and it's available to the public access, you risk highly, in my opinion, and I've been seeing these crop up more and more in the video game industry, you risk being sued by a copyright troll who's just looking for a chance to look at anything similar to what they've got to try and earn money, especially if you're a large developer, because they know you've got the pockets for it. It's an ironic choice of words, because one example, and this is a very extreme one, this was from over 10 years ago, Nintendo was sued by a minor toy developer, and I know Nintendo won this lawsuit nonetheless, about, they said that the franchise Pokemon infringed on these old toys from the late 80s, early 90s called Pocket Monsters in My Pocket, that was it. And they inevitably lost the lawsuit, but in either case, you're wasting then time and money defending these frivolous lawsuits. And like I said, just by the fact that you're a major developer who people know has money and they have success games, and now that you have something in a registry, there's a good chance somebody is looking for it in the register, looking for something in the registry in order to try and make a fast buck through a lawsuit.
So we need something akin to maybe the Child Protective Services, where you seal these things and never look at them again. Professor Nguyen, you've got a question.
Yes, actually not only to the speakers, but to the audience as well.
Please.
I know that in China, with games and high-tech and tech companies, with respect to patent filings, the government subsidized patent filings. And so we talk today that how big companies, they have built a really big patent portfolio and small companies unable to have patents. And so whether state governments willing to look at patent filings, and back to the question relating to IP, not only just talk about the service here, but the IP components of it. And the reason why I'm bringing it up with respect to patents, because it address the question relating to when you file for a patent, the information will be kept in secrecy. Therefore, state government, you only disclose that the patent filing is done, but information be kept at least until the patent issued, if you decide to stay, only have games in the United States. And so the 18 months there, whether that will be enough, or if you want to go in, because if you go international, then you disclose after 18 months. But if you don't go international, it stays until the patent issued, 2 years or 3 years. So taking care of the confidentiality, not revealing it, because under federal law, we're not going to review the information with patent filing. And so I am asking, I'm raising this to both the audience and the state governments in terms of incentivizing relating to patents acquisition.
It's a great point.
A simple change to the fact that you have to state what it's going to be beforehand during pre-production, and then it's out there until the game ships, is an issue. If you were able to apply for this retroactively, once the game is done, once you've shipped, now you can send in your paperwork. Then you don't have to get past any of the, there's no change in government policy. Now it's, okay, the document submitted, it's out there, but the game's out there too. So you're not divulging confidential information. Just the simple, not having to file this during pre-production, but to file when the game is done would solve this issue.
So getting money on the back end as opposed to during.
Yes.
then.
Well, you don't get it till the back end anyway, but I'm saying just rather than having to file, in order to be eligible, you have to file prior to beginning production on the game.
So file after.
File after, and you get around all this stuff.
Okay, very interesting. Any other comments, questions from the audience? The floor is open. Please, Leah, can we have a microphone here, please?
Are you going to ask me a question, Leah?
I was just going to say, when I collect data and statistics, I always tell people exactly what I'm collecting and why I need it, and I'm very mindful of what I need. So I don't actually need like a list of companies with the number of employees at each company. I just collect that more aggregately. But definitely that's something that I keep in mind, and I try to be very open with people so that they know what they're giving me and where it's going. So that was...
Thank you. I may have instigated that response from Leah by my flip comment. About poaching. I apologize for that. I know you don't provide information that supports that. Okay, so you
one comment I wanted to make was, you know, economic development is easy. You know, you can put money and value. Well, compared to workforce development. And when we're comparing is that, you know, like the conversation about earlier about IP and relocation, you know, economic development's about, you know, you can do the money and everything. We can hopefully bring Ted and those guys to Louisiana. But the fact is that, you know, you have to build up that atmosphere. And I think we were comparing a lot of stuff with the movie projects. And, you know, film is all about the project. They're going to go location, no matter what. Once you build the infrastructure and the ecosystem for development, all software development, like you have in North Carolina with the Triangle, with Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, you know, they're going to stay there. They've been there, the research center, for the last, 20 years or so, and they're not going to go anywhere. So that's what we're trying to build as well.
Okay. Comments, questions? Please, could we have the microphone in the center? Welcome, brother.
Hi. I'd like to ask this not just for the sake of analyzing the Maltese situation, but actually the whole pan-European situation. Do all those people, either on the panel or even in the audience over here, that are game developers, actually think that the fact that the United States and Canada allow patent protection for programming is a determining factor in the fact that basically in Europe we still have a very, very small industry.
So your question is, are the incentives in the United States creating a climate that is keeping Europe from succeeding in video game development?
Both the incentives and the fact that your patent laws allow patents to be protected over here.
I see the patent laws in the United States. I do not know the answer to this question. Are patent laws affecting? Please, Sean.
A lawyer in the house?
Yes. Sean, you take this one.
I'd say yes and no, depending on regarding the tax one. Starting with the tax one, yes, I think it definitely helps in the U.S. and Canada. Square Enix was looking to expand recently, and every single location, I think there's something like 6 or 7 locations that they're planning on that they're thinking of expanding to, are all in the United States or Canada. I believe it's Montreal, Toronto, Florida, Louisiana. I know is one. Cannot remember the other 2. But I think it is one of the first things that they look at. I think that's one of them. As going on to what you were saying, or Jeff was saying earlier, I think education is another factor. I think that's part of it. Higher education in the U.S. towards video game development is generally, it's better funded. Like I said, once again, going to the extreme example of the United Kingdom, it's only 1.2% of GDP goes to higher education in England. In the United States, it's twice that. So it's generally a more nurturing environment for it. And regarding patent law, generally, yes, I'd say the IP protection in this country is much more tight-locked here than the concern about protecting it. I mean, to once pull an extreme example, just last week we had the SOPA and the PIPA bills that were just about to go through Congress and Senate up until the large protest, which were generally concerned with, offshore piracy, which was admittedly their goal. And they had other problems, but that's more of a tangent than we really need to go into here. But the concern was, protecting the rights of American citizens and their intellectual property, keeping it protected from people pirating in other states. I was listening in on the broadcast of it when they were discussing it in committee, and honestly, I think it's a fixable solution. It's a fixable situation. I think any country in Europe could realistically, come up to be as strong as the U.S. or Canada in terms of video game development, because every one of these problems is solvable. But one comment that caught my attention when I was listening to the Senate hearings, the House hearings, was pointing out that, the way the bill was structured, it allowed a foreign entity to come into the United States and use the SOPA bill to sue another foreign entity over a copyright or trademark infringement, or actually largely copyright infringement. And this was a concern to committee, because it was using American tax dollars to allow one foreign entity to sue another, and the way the bill was phrased at the time, neither had a physical presence in this country. And one committee, it was I forget, it was one of California's representatives, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, was pointing out this is a huge problem because no other country reciprocates on this. There's no other country that would allow us to do something like that. And it was the representative from Florida, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, who said, well, maybe if we set up something like this, maybe another foreign entity would reciprocate. They would create a similar bill. We're going to hope to try and set a precedent. Honestly, I think that's wishful thinking. That's honestly a pipe dream. If they see that, if a foreign entity were to see that opening to sue in another country on some other country's tax dollars, they would take it. But point being, going roundabout, the point being is, it is better protected in this country because we have bills like that. I assume we'll see SOPA and PIPA again down the line, probably revised, but we will see them again because it is such a concern. Whereas in Europe, with a few exceptions here and there, it isn't as strong a concern. Even in Canada, I'd say it's not as concerned as much. To quote a friend of mine once, he says, the punishment for copyright infringement in Canada is basically the equivalent of a slap on the wrist, so nobody's really concerned about it. And Canada, I believe, in the last reading on it, is the #1. It might be #2, and it's either Canada or Brazil are 2 of the highest sources of copyright infringement on the globe. And I know it's Canada, Brazil, and China, I believe, are the top 3. So, long story short, the answer to your question, my opinion is yes. Do I think it's unfixable? No.
Well, thank you. I don't think there's any, there's no monopoly on creativity. I think everybody can be creative all around the world. Nobody talked about all the great games that are made in Japan during this conversation. I think what might be interesting, I do not know the history. I do know that you know, infograms. Lyon was the birthplace of video games in Europe, and where is it today? I think it'd be interesting if somebody in the audience knows what happened to them. That could be a story in itself. But thank you. We will wrap up this panel. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, all of you. And we'll see you later.